Hello, welcome back to this series of videos with the aim of helping you write your best comparative essay. In my first video, I went over some techniques to use in timed examinations to maximise content coverage, fluidity, and complex connections for your A-level exam. Again, we're going to be following the AQA, English Language and Literature A-level. And the techniques I've been talking about in the previous video is core to writing a sophisticated essay. So go back and see if you're unsure or you're new, and I'll see you back here when you're done. Again, if you're not with AQA, your own set of text will be just fine. It should be super easy to substitute in whatever you're comparing. So this video will be on how to compare form, context, and mode. So we're taking a real step towards the actual content of your comparative essays and the content of your smaller points that make up your essay. These words, context, mode, form, reception, audience, I'm sure they float a lot around your lessons, your revision. I'm sure you're fed up of hearing them. They're echoed succinctly in Assessment Objective 3, the one with 15 marks allocated to it. And it reads, AO3, demonstrate understanding of the significance and influence of the context in which texts are produced and received. So the way in which you will demonstrate this understanding of these contexts is by comparing them. So by setting them distinctly against one another, and creating a dialogue between your text context where you begin to craft complex and erudite slices of your essay without preempting, assuming. It's probable your exam will ask you to compare two texts with different modes. I've looked through the past papers available and the specimen paper, and as you'll know, this isn't a coincidence at all. Examiners are directly setting you up in an advantageous position, if you can believe that. If you're stuck at where to begin and what point to start with, I think a solid bet is comparing reception and context. So take the 2018 exam paper that we used in the previous video. So compare and contrast how the writer of Neither Here Nor There and the speakers of the walking tour present the experiences of visiting the Louvre. So I'm doing this revision. I'm starting to think about some questions that, some starting questions as I'm thinking about context. And these would be, how does their form, so prose, an answer audio guide, mark their ability to influence me as a reader or a listener? And why does their form have an impression on me? And how does it influence my trust in the writer's or speaker's voice? So these three questions all begin with the interrogative how and why, because I need my thinking to really help me craft the two sides to my comparative point. And comparing form is about comparing how audiences react to a text and how that affects their digestion of the content within that mode. So let's stick with this example. Not only will an audience react differently to a spoken text than a written one, and there's some fabulous, really complex and high-level connections that you can make between that. But the context of receival is important too. So Bryson's readers could literally be anywhere in the world, but then a walking tour, well, you're more likely to listen to it while you're actually in Paris, in the Louvre. The distance from the gallery in question is already informing our trust in the writer's discretion. I don't know about you, but I think I'd be more likely to trust the guide video because I'm listening to it while I'm actually there appreciating what's around me. That's not to say I enjoy it more. Bryson's comedic anecdote and other techniques endear him more to me, but reliability is significantly different between the two things, and that's also a really complex and elegant way of exploring contexts. So a small activity I did for my A-level. I had an anthology of non-fiction texts. Is to list all of the text and then list all the places you'd be most likely to receive that text. Then think about why you'd be digesting each text. So just because I'm reading Bryson's book, Travels in Europe, doesn't mean that I have any desire to go to Europe or Paris or anywhere that he talks about. Maybe I just enjoy his writing. Nuances of reception are extremely important when revising texts. And I think it really gives you confidence to prove that you've situated your texts in context and thought about their production and reception. In other words, you're directly fulfilling AO3. So if you remember from our last video, we consolidated the triangle method, one which you can use to create really neat and elegant comparisons in your writing. So this method doesn't just work with semantic and linguistic points, but it also works with context. So two different production modes can create the same effect. How does a text receiver create two different effects? Or even two different contexts, two different modes can create two different effects. That's fine as well. Examiners want you to put contexts and modes in conversation with each other because texts don't just exist without being read, especially in your case with all of your anthology texts. I'm reminded of that question. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it still make a sound? If a text is written and there's no one around to read it, does it still constitute as literature? If you have an answer to that question, please email me because I think it's a fascinating debate. I did a lot about that in my first year of what makes literature. But in this case, texts can't be appreciated and investigated fully until they're placed in their context and their real world of production and retrieval. So in this case, literature is only so when it is placed in someone's hand, in someone's ear, and that's why context is key to understanding these texts. So my advice is somewhere in your comparative essay, as I said before, make an explicit point about a text's different mode and then elucidate on why the different modes affect audience absorption of the content. However, just because you've made this really explicit point doesn't mean you shouldn't keep it in mind when you're writing your evidence-based points. So your language, lexis, semantic, grammar, all those sorts of points. Think about whether a writer has used a specific lexical semantic sort of word because of the mode of text. So our guide video will use active verbs, look, take in, because it's an audio guide and you're there to follow the instructions. Bryson will use imagery, metaphors to characterize the Louvre because he's a prose writer and he has to craft these mental images in people's head to keep them interested. These are really timid examples, and I'm sure you can come up with some very complex evidence far better than I could do. But this is the beginnings of connecting content, context, and then comparison as well. So a small thing I'd like to note at this point is context will dictate the way you write about writing, it dictate the way you speak about certain texts. Without divulging too deeply into what I'm going to be covering in the next video, which is very jargon-based, it's worth mentioning at this point that text modes will determine the sort of language you're using, the sort of language analysis jargon you're using in your texts. So whether that be in phonetics, phonology, prosodics, or lexis, grammar, semantics, a text mode will require a different glossary of terms when you speak about it. So just keep that in mind as well. And when I was doing my research to make these videos, I found this fantastic glossary from AQA. Here's the link to it, but you can just put it into Google. It's absolutely fabulous. I would have absolutely loved this as a A-level student, so go and have a look. Everything we've covered so far, I think, can be described as an investigation into pragmatics of our texts. So the meanings of English and their implications are inevitably linked to the mode in which they spring from. So some of these choices are linked to context, politeness principles, ideological differences, social maxims, a whole load of other factors. So inescapably, language is subject to the context it's received in, and this is what we're trying to pinpoint in the exam. So the main task I'd like you to complete is to take a look at the text from your anthology, the guidebook not for parents, so any of those that you'd like, and then set it alongside the GrandsNet forum. So the question I'd like you to answer, which is slightly different than an exam question, how do these text modes influence the way in which readers react to Parisian sites? Now, I don't want you to look at the language. Don't get too close reading at this point. I want you to write a point that's only about the text context and their respective receptions. If you want, you can use the triangle technique to tighten your points. But yes, you can pause the video now and complete this. So some things you may have focused on may reverberate around the idea of different audiences. GrandsNet is for grandparents, the guidebook's for children. Perhaps you focused on how the guidebook is an online forum mode affects the reliability of the conveyance of information between one person and another. Perhaps you thought that both were somewhat reliable opinions of Parisian sites because one is an informative guidebook and the other is a conversation between people who have been to Paris and have experienced Paris. So whatever you focused on, you'll have a point that directly revolves around the dialectic of contexts. And my advice is to always include a point, such as this in your essay. Doesn't really matter where you put it, but it can be an excellent starting point, as I said. Show the examiner you're aware of modal differences before you get into really nitty-gritty language level comparison. And if you'd like more practice, please go away and write an exam style answer. Stemming from this question, text A is from GrandsNet forum titled Travelling to Paris with a Grandchild, and text B is an extract, Den Bones from Not for Parents. So compare the way in which text A and text B present Paris as a place suitable for children. That would be a fabulous practice essay for you. And I don't think there is that question on any of the exam papers or the specimen paper. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. It's a little bit more lecture-like than my previous video, but I hope it's shown you how you can absolutely fulfill AO3 and really create some fantastic, complex points on content reception and how you can start weaving that into your really detailed language analysis. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about your exams, about revision, about undergraduate study. Please don't hesitate to message me. Keep up your revision. It will be worth it, I promise you. I know it's really hard at the moment, but it's looking up and it will be worth it. Remember to always plan your answers at the beginning of your exams. Quality over quantity. Stay safe and good luck for the future. You will all be just fine. Thank you.